Awesome. Yeah. So for those of you who are with us, the P4H Table Talk is just an initiative that we are trying to get off the ground as a way to continue building capacity. That's all that P4H is about, is building the capacity of individuals to be the change in their local community, for their local community. And so if we can invest in the knowledge that you as our impact network, and those of you who have been a part of the masterclass, just to think further and deeper about topics that can really move the needle in solving large, complex problems. One of my main goals for the Table Talk at large is to help explore avenues that promote human flourishing. And we know that diversity, equity, inclusion is a huge piece of that. If we look back at this summer and this whole pandemical times, it's been a very clarion call to become more active and aware of what this looks like. And so we're going to go ahead and jump right on in with our special guest, Kelli Dowd. Thank you so much for being with us, Kelli. It means a lot to me as we got to connect at the ALE Leadership Educators Conference this past summer. And I got to hear your workshop on diversity, equity, inclusion. And that was like, we need to talk more about this, especially as nonprofits, because there is a huge place for that in the work that we do. And so just to lay the groundwork of where we're headed, one of the objectives, or two objectives that I have for us today, is that we would become more familiar with the subject of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then also that we would know how nonprofits can practice good DEI principles, or other words that hopefully you'll educate me on too, Kelli. So with that, welcome, Kelli. Would you share a little bit about yourself? And then I have a couple questions to ask as a way of an intro.
Yeah, thanks, Cameron, for having me. I'm Kelli Dowd. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the coordinator for student services, leadership, and engagement at the School of Health Sciences at Oakland University in Michigan. That's a long title. But so my passion and my work has been with students and really guiding students towards civic engagement and social justice work. And that's where DEI really fits really closely together, I think. With what we're doing. I've done a lot of work with, I'm an AmeriCorps alum. I coordinated alternative breaks in my past, if you're familiar with students coming for alternative break trips to do service, during school. And yeah, I've just been really passionate about the subject and how we can make sure that we're being more intentional in our work so that we're not harming communities, and we're able to educate our students or the folks doing the work at the same time.
Yeah, and I love how even you keyed in on not harming communities, because those best intentions can lead to harmful practices and outcomes. And that's part of P4H's founding story, is like, whoa, we had a very rude awakening to what is actually helpful. And it has its roots in diversity, equity, inclusion. If we were to include community members into the design process of our program, then we could have had a better outcome faster. So I'm excited for this.
Yeah, me too.
And then, so I have a quick 7-question litany that I'm going to fire at you. Ultimately, this will help our audience members get to know you a little bit more in a fun way. So first question, are you ready?
Yeah.
What is a key component of a good dinner party for you?
Ooh, I'd say music.
Yeah. What type?
It can be any kind of music, but it should be with the mood and the vibe, and it's going to set the tone for sure.
Yeah, that's a good atmosphere to get. Okay, next, someone offers you a trip to anywhere in the world. Where are you going to go?
Greece. I've been wanting to go to Greece for a really long time. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds awesome. Sounds awesome. Who is one of the funniest people you know?
Oh, wow. Probably my partner. He's constantly cracking me up. I think, students that I work with too. I have one student that used to write for a sketch team. And so he's really funny.
That's awesome. And I know in the line of work that you do, humor is really important, I think, because it conveys so many things and can bring levity to pretty severe or grave conversations.
Yeah.
The final 4, what is your favorite word?
Oh, wow. I'm going to say knowledge.
And what about your least favorite word?
Hate.
Yeah. What makes you mad?
Microaggressions.
Yeah, I believe it. And then the last one, what brings you hope?
I think young people,
Hmm.
in particular students, but young people in general, I think they're ready to make change, and there's less barriers,
Yeah,
like to inclusion, I think now. And so they give me hope for things getting better.
yeah, I believe it. That's so cool. Thank you so much for engaging there. And I'm excited. And hopefully we get to expand on some of those questions and your answers as we move forward. But to kick us off, I think we need a frame or just lay the foundation for us. What is DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion? There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think obviously a big question, but so for me at least, like diversity is recognizing our differences, all the different differences that we have. To me, equity is then taking those differences and recognizing where people need um, resources or don't have the same access as other folks. And so how can we make sure that everyone has that same access and that we would all be starting at some sort of similar point?
Yeah.
And inclusion to me is the space where people are heard. And so it's making sure that not only that we recognize that you're there and we might have made some things more accessible, but did we invite you? Did we make you feel like you're part of the process and part of the community that we're creating in that inclusive space? And then here we've been adding justice to the conversation too. So like once all of those DEI things are done, we can create justice. And then we've started talking about Jedi as the new like Disney's probably gonna sue us, right? But justice, equity, diversity, inclusion as a way to talk about, it's easy to just talk about it all the time where
Yeah.
like how important it is that we want to be diverse, that we want to make sure people are heard.
Yeah.
Justice, I think, is when we're actually have done the thing, the action step is taken.
Yeah, I love that. And may the force be with us as we try to understand what the future of the Jedi look like.
Mm-hmm.
And it does seem like these building blocks stack on top of each other. Would you say that it's a correct interpretation of how the DEI itself works to get to justice? Or yeah.
I think so. I think like you could be stacking them in different ways or whatever that looks like. And it might look different if your population of people is pretty homogeneous. That might look different, right?
Yeah.
But I think we have to like recognize that those things exist before we can then take the next steps and action towards creating change.
Yeah. Yeah, and your favorite word you said was knowledge, and it seems like that's a huge component of what you do in your job, and also the need of the hour for people to be knowledgeable about diversity, equity, inclusion, and what they look like lived out.
Right. I think we don't know what we don't know, right? So
Yep.
if we have no experience like with diverse populations, or we might have those good intentions like we mentioned, but then we don't have the voices at the table to tell us if that's really the need, or if that's something they're already doing themselves, or that the community's been working on, that we feel like we're doing something, that our intentions are good, but then the impact then is not congruent, and if the people aren't involved in the process of creating it, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Can you bring it down to the ground level? So we kind of set that 30,000-foot view of a framework. What about maybe in your job yourself? Like, what are you doing now to encourage, promote DEI?
Yeah, so it might even be really small things. So like in my current role, I teach leadership skills to students who are studying health. And so we're trying to create a space that they'll be more collaborative and work together as health professionals, so that we're serving patients and communities better, and that we're making sure that we can kind of end some of those disparities within health that have to do with equity and inclusion and diversity. So on a daily basis, at least with my students, I'm making sure that when I'm using examples for the website, or for a flyer, or for curriculum that we're teaching, that I'm using different examples, different, everyone knows examples of like, okay, Sue did blah, blah, blah. We could use different names of people even to make someone feel more heard, or genders, or, abilities, or like even just having, the PowerPoint I'm showing to the team, making sure that not every single picture is of a white student. Can just tiny things like that can make people feel like they're more included in the space, or that they're being thought of in the space. I think for nonprofits and stuff too, I have a lot of experience working with nonprofits. It can be those little things like putting your pronouns on your name tag.
Mm.
And so if you're working in a shelter or something, you're probably going to come across some folks who are transgender, because that population has a really high rate of homelessness. And so, or people experiencing homelessness. And so I think having that on your intake form, or like having that as a part of, just like your staff has it, someone who uses different pronouns is going to see that as a safe space for them, or a place where they're going to be heard. And so it can
That's
just
awesome.
those little things.
Yeah, and I think it's so helpful to hear about the on the ground processes that you have in place. And I think of what P4H, like at every aspect, every small micro turn of our programming, how do we bring in this inclusive, diverse, equitable, maybe it's a self-reflection that happens there. Would you say it's self-reflection, or how can you help me there?
Yeah, I think some of it is like maybe doing, as simple as like a SWOT analysis or something on what your organization or you can do, you have control over that, like where are your strengths, where are you doing well in this area, where could you maybe improve, where's an opportunity that we're not utilizing. I mean, even right now, we could maybe have like closed captioning or something like that would make even just this experience more inclusive. If we had someone, doing that for us, or doing someone who could come and do sign language or something like that. I think those kinds of things where once you gain the knowledge, like saying self-reflection, I think I spend a lot of time reading and just trying to keep up to date as well on just DEI issues in general. Especially when it comes to education, because that's where I'm working, and health now too, because I'm working with but so yeah, me educating myself on those topics and what are the issues happening within it, then I can better position myself to say, okay, well, what's one small thing I can do to change something today? And a lot of it isn't like presentations and stuff where we could have more closed captioning in videos, or make sure that our documents are being even just laid out so that a screen reader could read it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I love that. And that's a good challenge, and the necessity of being reflective and somewhat critical, like a critical reflection of programs and processes for nonprofits seems to be a need for DEI. When you were talking, Kelly, it made me think of the question, why is this significant? Another way to say it is, if we get this right, what happens in our world today?
That's such a good question. I mean, I think if we get this right, we can start to break down a lot of the like systemic barriers that keep certain groups marginalized or unable to have the kind of growth and success that other groups have based on these like arbitrary things that are in place that we, could be battling against. I think the more that DEI is included in all the things we do all the time for everyone, the more that it will be, a part of just like the everyday fabric, and less likely that we'll be able to create these divisions, I think. And especially for communities, like obviously nonprofit work, the intention is to serve others and to do good, typically. And so I think if we're doing DEI right, then we're asking the communities that we're serving, we're involving them in the process of creating new programs or initiatives. And I think utilizing our funds even better, like money obviously is like a big part of it. But I think when we're thinking more DEI focus, like I think would be less of a battle for the funds and more collaboration. I think a lot of times we have a great idea for something we want to start, but there might be other orgs that are already doing that work. And so could we collaborate more? Could we share resources and utilize them more? I think when DEI is the vision or the mission or the focus, that collaboration and inclusion comes pretty naturally with that. And it's less about, I need to make sure my thing goes well, but like, how can we pool everything together to better serve the populations?
Yeah. I love that. And it just made me think of like, what is DEI? Is it a method itself? Like, I don't know if it is a method, but it is a frame upon which you can look through and see like, okay, this will transform every component of my nonprofit or of my curricular program that I'm running. And I think that's really cool and super helpful. Knowledge is power.
Right. I think too that we sometimes like DEI ends up being like a checkbox a lot of times, especially like in higher or like larger corporation settings. The larger the organization, I think it becomes more of a checkbox. And so people in general, marginalized populations, I'm a queer person. I can tell when it's not genuine as far as like we support queer people. If there's nothing on campus that actually does that, then
Yeah.
You can't just put the picture on the page. Like don't just put a picture on your website that looks DEI. Like you got to do the work too, because I think marginalized folks see past that. They can see where it's just like lip service versus we really care about this, and this is part of our mission and fabric of what we do.
Yeah, I love that because I think of the word integrity. If a nonprofit is aiming to be filled with integrity, then there has to be more than lip service and actions behind it. And you can't have actions without knowledge. Like if we're going to impact behavior, we need to bridge the knowledge gap that is there. And so hopefully conversations like this spark future conversations too. What you were saying made me ask another question is like, what other common missteps are there and how can nonprofits avoid them? The other one is like the first one, check boxes. DEI is not a checkbox that dissolves the authenticity in your impact.
I think something that folks say on campus a lot, and I think it applies to nonprofits too, is like we try to hire diverse field, like we just don't have a diverse staff. And so we're doing the best we can with like a majority white staff, or like we just can't find the diversity that we want on our team. Because like ultimately we need diverse voices to be able to provide the best services and stuff in general. But so like thinking about how are you like recruiting for the jobs that you have? Like, are you giving folks a chance that maybe they don't have like the best resume compared to this person, but still could do a great job? Like how are we like bringing people onto our teams? Because that's definitely an argument I hear a lot is like, we don't have a diverse team, like we're trying, but like, what are you really trying to, I mean, again, if you just like put the picture out there, we're looking for, diverse staff, like that's one thing, but like, how are you going to support them when they're there? Like, are they part of the, decision-making? Are you yourself in a position where you could step down and give someone else a chance to take on a role, sit on a committee or something like that to make sure people's voices are like actually at the table?
Yeah.
I think, it's easy to say we hired a Black staff person, but if that person never gets to share their voice or their ideas or whatever it is, like, then that's not really DEI either.
Wow. And for a lot of the individuals who would be watching this, if they took the masterclass, we talk about Arnstein's model of the ladder of social participation or citizen participation, where we talk about, well, there is this level of manipulation and tokenism, but then if we get to this citizen control, that's where we really have shifted power dynamics, where the people making the decisions are people who have historically not made decisions. And it's a ladder to climb in the sense of making pathways or avenues for that to happen. And I love the point of you need to support people you put in place, especially if they have historically not been coached or trained in that. There's a larger learning curve for people like that.
Yeah, I think, depending on who it is and
right.
Kind of support are you giving that person and like a seat at the table. That person's not just the checkbox. They should be there to help facilitate change ultimately.
Yeah. I'd love to hear about potentially the savior complex, which a lot of people are familiar with in term, and DEI and nonprofits. Can you kind of mush those together and give an opinion?
Yeah, so I think something else I was going to say is around DEI and relationship building. I think so much of DEI is like building authentic relationships with people. Again, that like people can tell when you're not being genuine. Or not being your full selves, or that you're there for the photo op or you're there for the donor opportunity. People can tell that kind of stuff. And so I think to break down the savior complex, it is about building relationships and creating spaces where, people that you're serving especially are part of the process of like what deciding what they need or deciding how what services are necessary, that kind of thing. I think, I would hesitate to like start a nonprofit, let's say, like I'm going to start a nonprofit or even just like a chapter of something in a community, the first, few months at least would just be going around and meeting folks in the community, meeting the other nonprofit leaders, meeting church leaders, meeting, the boards of the city council, the school board, like as many people as possible, because there's tons of people already doing the work probably. Like
Yes.
we're not usually creating something that's brand spanking new. We're doing stuff that we know is a need. We can see where there are needs for certain things, but maybe there's community already working on that,
Right.
and we're kind of overstepping that. And so that relationship piece, I think, is more of that respecting equity inclusion. Is like building relationships first.
Yes. And the shirt I'm wearing, it says see people before problems, which is this idea of relationships first. It's so easy, especially as a white male with privilege, lots of privilege. I can be like, I have the best idea. And that's not true, because I have not had the lived experience of a Haitian man or a Haitian woman, which is the population P4H works with largely. And to be able to honor their story is key. And I love how you've grounded relationships, because that's how we're going to move forward. The future, I've said now, is for the connected. If we're able to build relationships and help students, other nonprofits build authentic relationships, then we're actually going to, see the systemic issues rise to the surface, rather than treat whatever we thought was the problem.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is education based too, as far as like your nonprofit could be, if you're having a weekly staff meeting or something, like having a conversation about DEI, or like it's just like connected impact to what you're doing, or just like educating yourself on different topics that are related to your social justice issue that's at hand. To the community. That some stuff we did in alternative breaks was like the idea that without, you need education and direct service and that reflection piece to really be doing quality community work. And so like, if you're not, obviously, like when you hire someone new, you're not just going to throw them out there to do the stuff. You should take some time to educate them about the population you're serving. What's the historical, I live in Detroit. There's a huge historical like connotations to different aspects of all kinds of services.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have knowledge of that, you're not going to be able to like properly serve.
Yeah.
And so as much as like you're doing the work and like I'm an expert, quote unquote, on certain topics, like I don't think I'm an expert on anything. Like I'm just like constantly trying to update and like, okay, we have a new term for this. We're going to try that this time. But yeah, trying to stay up to date on like, you're serving a community. You need to know what's happening in the community. Is there someone for your nonprofit that's going to the local community meetings and things like that to build those relationships and show up? I think that's a big part of it too. It's like showing your face where the people are, meet people where they're at.
That's so good. And I mean, one of the goals that I was thinking about for this is like, I hope people are able to find a nugget to walk away with and implement today in their nonprofit. And so one thing that I want to do is, in our staff meeting, let us discuss DEI and do a SWOT analysis for us. Like, how are we achieving or promoting DEI practices in everything we're doing? And just make a conversation. I do think that the P4H staff team is really tight knit. And so there's already a safe, trusting place to have harder conversations about things that could be tense. What would you recommend to nonprofits who might not have that type of internal culture to bring up DEI sensitive topics?
I mean, I think it's trying to utilize, resources that are like quick and easy at first times. Like it can just be a video or, a short video or article or something to get the conversation started. And maybe it's connected to what you do. So if you're serving people experiencing homelessness, I like that people first language. So trying to like, that's one thing we could do right now is like, stop saying homeless people, say people experiencing homelessness. They're not homeless people, they're people first. So the only place where that isn't like that anymore is people with disabilities. They're okay with being called disabled. That's part of the disabled community has decided that. And so we're listening to them on that one. But otherwise, I try to do people first, like people experiencing homelessness, because they're people. And we're all like one accident away from homelessness, really, if we're being honest, a lot of us are. So I think Okay, wait, what was the question?
The question, so I work for a
A nugget?
nonprofit, a nugget, but I work for a nonprofit, let's say, and it's not a very open culture to talk about
Yeah,
hard
okay.
topics.
Mhm.
What would
Yeah,
you say?
so videos definitely I think is an easy way to have a discussion. I think it's finding some things that maybe the topics are connected to what you do. So yeah,
Mm,
if you're surveying people experiencing homelessness, then find something about the homeless population and how LGBT folks are like the largest portion of people experiencing homelessness. And like, why do you think that might be the case?
yeah.
And then what's one thing we can do to make our space more inclusive to LGBT folks?
Wow. Yeah.
I think it can be small things that aren't, you don't have to start with like, let's read an article about why I think this is white supremacy. Like, you don't have to start with the terms that like make people like, get really uncomfortable at first. Right. But hopefully at some point you can talk about white supremacy and white saviorism, because that's part of the work. That's what is being impacted. Isn't our intention, but that's part of the impact, right? So.
Yeah, precisely. When you are doing your own literature review and building out your knowledge base, what are you reading and watching?
I mean, all kinds of stuff. I would say there's an organization that's Academics for Black Lives. And so I've spent a lot of time, they did like a conference and it was for, educators. And it was specific to like anti-Black racism. But so they created some really great toolkits and things like that. I know for a long time I was watching the like MTV Decoded with Francesca Ramsey. She does a series of videos. That's what I was kind of thinking of with like a way to have a conversation that's more lighter, but is about DEI, is that she did this like MTV series of videos that are all short videos about different DEI topics in a way that's really digestible and funny usually. So it takes away some of the things that make people uncomfortable. And allows you to have a lighter conversation, but that like hopefully will set the tone for then having those deeper conversations too. Because then too, when you have DEI, like marginalized folks at your table, and you're doing these very beginning DEI conversations, like those people can feel either tokenized or like you're making them tell their story or share on behalf of a race or gender or whatever it is. And so finding ways that those folks still feel like they're getting something out of those conversations and that they're not being just like, expected to be the voice of a group.
Yeah. That's really good. And I think it's a virtue. Is empathy a virtue? I don't know. Sure. If we can call empathy a virtue, I feel like that's something that's illuminating itself from our conversation, is that this call to empathy, the people first language, this idea of really attempting to feel what somebody else is feeling because of some identity that they hold, and how that's important for guiding the decisions that nonprofits and educators make in this world.
I think like we're all going to make mistakes, right? Like that's something that a lot of folks worry about when having these conversations or like putting it out on your website or whatever it is, like you're worried about making mistakes. I think it's just saying when you do make a mistake, I'm sorry, and I will learn better and do better next time. Like there really isn't anything anyone else is expecting you to go over the top sorries, it's really just like actually show you're going to do better the next time.
And that moves us towards the pro-social behavior we want to see in the world of humility, repentance, and forgiveness, and to push back against the cancel culture, because that's also a very toxic phenomenon.
Right, get back to the knowledge. Get back to, you don't know what you don't know. And there's plenty of, ignorance has a negative connotation, but like a lot of us are ignorant about different things you just never knew about. And so we can't expect people to go from 0 to 100 on all of these things either with no exposure or, they haven't built those relationships with anyone to know different. So.
Yeah. And I love that, the word exposure, because that's what this short 30 minutes has been, is hopefully a brief exposure to all of our Impact Network and Masterclass people to hear more about DEI and its relevance in the workplace, in our communities, and for our future. So a final question for you. What would you hope that somebody watching this walks away with? What do you want them to feel?
I guess I hope that folks walk away with the sense of that DEI it's not the checkbox, like we said, that it is like a part, should be the fabric of what we're doing. Like nowadays, everyone has like that mission statement or something that says DEI in it, but ultimately it shouldn't even have to be in there, right? It should just be part of everything that we're doing until we get to a point where that's true. I think we can still include it in our mission statements and stuff to make sure that people know, but that it's not just a checkbox into that. It's people's relationships and lives that are really, you know, on the line or at stake or is being impacted most. And so if we want to do the best work with the best intentions in the most meaningful way, we have to put DEI at the forefront of what we do so we can get justice. And that so that some of these nonprofits will go out of business at some point, right? We should want to have less of us, right? We should want to need less services and things. So hopefully the more we can recognize DEI, recognize the ways we can collaborate with each other too, and share the resources, the more we can eliminate the need for what we do too.
That's right. I love that. Fixing the system, not just the symptoms. Kelli, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And for those of you watching, we really appreciate your time here. If you have any questions or anything else, please send them over to me and I will make sure they get to Kelli. Kelli, would it be all right if I shared your email with the group?
Yeah, that's fine.
Awesome. Well, then everybody who's watching, I'll make sure that you have that as well. Kelli, I'm going to go ahead and say au revoir. It was wonderful to have you and many blessings.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.
Take care.